Hi, everyone. I can see people joining. We're just going to give people a few more minutes to log in. Okay, hi everyone. I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to LCI's first ever webinar, How Occupational Therapy Can Support Those Living with Long COVID. So thank you so much. We're really pleased with the level of interest in tonight's session. We're also going to be recording the session just in case there are people who haven't managed to attend, and we will pop that link up on our website as soon as we can. Okay, so I just wanted to share our social media information on our website. You can find our contact information on our website, and you can follow us on social media to get updates on our advocacy work that we're doing here in Ireland and to get information on any future events. So while I leave the slide on for a minute, I wanted to introduce myself. So I'm Ciara O'Connell. I am co-founder of LCI along with Tanya Bowalda. I'm also the lead rep for the Republic of Ireland for a charity called Long Covid Kids, which is a charity that's registered in the UK, but operating internationally. So I myself am an ME patient for the past 10 years, and my daughter has had post-viral ME also for the past 4 years. And my son has developed long COVID and a condition called PANS following COVID infection. He was previously fit and healthy. So I suppose our family's been severely impacted by repeat COVID infections. Myself and my daughter's ME is both kind of significantly worsened. But I suppose I was kind of interested in long COVID advocacy, but before our own first COVID infection, which was 2021. Back in 2020, I was interested in advocating for long COVID patients in Ireland because I suppose having been through the journey myself with my ME and with my daughter's ME, I was conscious that there's real problems with post-viral illness, for patients in Ireland in terms of just recognition and accessing services. And I guess I didn't want to have long COVID patients face the same battles that we had faced. So yeah, that's me. So for tonight's agenda, we're just going to do a quick introduction to LCI. Then Ciara Breen, who is the AOTI representative to the HSE Long COVID Working Group, will present for OT in adults with long COVID. And then Kirsty Stanley is going to speak to OT in children with long COVID. So Kirsty is an independent OT at Occupation for Life Limited, and she's also my colleague at Long COVID Kids charity as well. And then we're going to do a Q&A session with Tanya. So you can go ahead and submit your questions. If people have questions as we go, we're going to wait till the end and Tanya will run through those with us. So who we are. So we formed just 6 months ago, myself and Tanya, and I guess I was kind of working away as the lead rep for Long COVID Kids. And when I was kind of in contact with a lot of Long COVID patients who were really passionate about advocating for long COVID in Ireland. And we were all kind of, I guess, working kind of separately. So I suppose we realized that there was no formal organization in Ireland for advocating for long COVID sufferers, and that was kind of really slowing things down. So we realized, I guess, that we were going to have to set one up and get things moving. So we currently have 15 team members, and you'll find that only a small portion of our team members are on our website. And that's because, I suppose, for a variety of reasons, but people will be aware that there's a lot of, stigma around long COVID, and not everybody is able to be public with their advocacy work. And I suppose it's just important to call out the challenge in terms of progressing, with our advocacy goals when we are a team who are, most of us, suffering from long COVID or a similar condition. So we'd like to see a registered charity set up for long COVID sufferers in Ireland. I think that's a long-term goal, and I think that's really important. We also want to ensure adequate services are provided for all long COVID patients in the country. And we'd like to collaborate with the HSE for better support of long COVID patients, including kind of regular PPI, which is public and patient involvement in research and in reviewing the HSE model of care for long COVID. So our priorities, we want to establish equitable access to long COVID services for all patients. So I think it's important to say that at the moment, it's a bit of a two-tiered system where if you're a public patient, you're likely finding that there's longer delays with getting access to services, and maybe not as much frequency in terms of that ability to access your doctor or your other services in comparison to people who are able to pay for private care. And then we also want to ensure nationwide availability of long COVID services. So there's a bit of a postcode lottery going on at the moment where most of the services are focused around the Dublin area. And, we do have long COVID public clinics in Cork, Limerick and Galway. But I think it's clear that that's not going to meet the demand from across the country. And also it's important to say that there are long COVID patients who are too severely ill to travel a couple of hours to a clinic. We also want to ensure that long COVID services are staffed by clinicians who are knowledgeable in long COVID and its management. So what we're seeing is that the long COVID picture is moving really, really quickly internationally. And we need to know, I suppose, that the clinicians who are on the ground treating long COVID patients are staying up to date on, I suppose, the theories behind the cause of long COVID and on its management as well. And it's important to us to dispel misinformation about long COVID, which we're kind of seeing in some members of I guess, the medical community and also in wider society. I suppose the most common myth that comes to mind is the myth that long COVID is a psychological condition. So obviously we know from data, a lot of data now saying that most definitely is not the case. So we also want to provide support to long COVID sufferers in Ireland by providing signposting and information that's specific to the Irish long COVID situation. And we're doing that via our website, via events like this, and also through our social media. And we're looking to give, I guess, direct access for long COVID patients to symptom management advice, while the services remain difficult to access. So such as tonight's webinar for OT. So, just looking to connect people up, I guess, with the people who have that information, while people are struggling to kind of get into services around the country. So also to raise awareness on the continued risks posed by COVID-19 infection. So with every new week brings new COVID-19 cases, and that will bring a proportion of people affected by long COVID. So unfortunately, that continues to happen. There will be new long COVID patients coming through, and so to us, it's really, really important that we make sure to promote the use of mitigations to control the transmission of the virus. Things like wearing high-grade masks, using HEPA filters, and continued testing, and other kind of things that we can be doing to try and bring that risk down for people. So that's a little bit about LCI, and now I'm going to pass you over to Ciara Breen, who is AOTI representative for the HSE Long COVID Working Group. Welcome, Ciara.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's a pleasure to be here this evening, and I'd like to thank you and all of the Long COVID Ireland committee for inviting us myself and Kirsty to come and speak on occupational therapy here this evening. And thanks to everybody who's tuned in and given up their evening to listen to us as well. I'm really happy that occupational therapy has been the first one that you have had, and I hope it's the first of many, because it really, long COVID is such a complex condition, and it really takes teamwork, interprofessional working, and real collaboration with the patient community to kind of, you know, resolve and improve this current picture, patchy service provision, and really unclear kind of rehab trajectory. But we do know some things that will help and will support, and I suppose that's what myself and Kirsty are here this evening to talk about, and to outline, I suppose, the role of occupational therapy with long COVID. So I'll go ahead and share my slides, will I? Sorry, the window at the top is stopping me from just getting to my slideshow bit.
Don't worry, no rush.
Just having to go through them one by one. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. Occupational therapy for long COVID. So my name is Ciara Breen, and I'm a member of the Association of Occupational Therapists in Ireland, and here this evening as an invited guest with thanks of Long Covid Ireland, Advocacy Ireland. So I'm an occupational therapist. I've got over 20 years of experience, and my main clinical experience is in the area of neurorehabilitation, and also some older persons rehabilitation. And throughout my career, I suppose working with people with stroke, concussion, multiple sclerosis, and a lot of other issues, a lot of other conditions where similar issues present, not the same at all, but certainly similar issues around cognition and fatigue, and particularly thinking about hidden disability as well, where often things are not immediately apparent to those around the person. So that certainly is my background, a real interest and history of work in this area. I've also been involved, particularly I work currently with the National Clinical Programme for Stroke, and so I'm not here representing them this evening, but really why I've come into the long COVID area of work is via Galway University Hospitals, where I was OT manager up until the end of last year, December. And we were one of the first long COVID clinics to have occupational therapy involvement. And as later on, which fed in.
I think, are we having issues with Ciara's sound? Tanya? Yeah, are we having issues with Ciara's sound there?
Sorry, folks.
Ciara, can you hear us now?
I can hear you. I'm so sorry. I just dropped out there. Can you see the screen again?
Yeah, we can indeed. It was just your sound that's gone, but it seems to be back now. Thanks so much.
Okay, sorry about that. Gremlins this evening, definitely. So long COVID, I know that the group that are here this evening will be well informed about long COVID, and it's a patient-derived umbrella term, really, that encompasses a host of symptoms that can be experienced after COVID infection. And this graphic is well known. It was produced in 2021 and really shows, I suppose, the constellation of symptoms that can be experienced, and also the overlapping and complexity that brings to the picture. Now, exact figures of people suffering with long COVID in Ireland are unknown. There is a study underway, the FADA study, and there's also another EPI study, I think, going on or about to start. But we know that there is a significant impact for people affected, significant impact for the families of those affected, significant impact on our workforce, on our society. And really, it really means that we need to address this. It's obviously a moral thing that we must, address, and avoid harm and injury to people. But also we must, it affects all of us, and with COVID continuing to be so prevalent within our community, it could be anybody who's affected by long COVID. I personally know several. And I suppose the broad scope of occupational therapy means that as a profession, not only can we address these issues individually, kind of by siloing, and one person treats the pain and one person treats the fatigue, another person gets sent to 3 months later for cognition, but actually we can kind of really look with a broad scope at many, many, many of these issues. And we can also begin to explore interdependencies, because we know that symptoms don't occur in isolation, but also very often occur in clusters. So where there's symptom exacerbation of one thing, and it has a knock-on effect or a co-occurring effect with other symptoms as well. Next slide, supposed to go.
It's not your night, Ciara, with technology. There you go.
So yes, so I suppose really in terms of the Irish context in long COVID and the Irish context in terms of the pandemic, the question has to be asked, if we have a great first half, that Ireland as a nation kind of successfully was looking pretty good for us in the early phase of the pandemic. We had a very highly successful vaccination program. Public health messaging was very frequent, was very consistent. At the start of the pandemic, and there was also a phenomenal response. Society really came together with healthcare workers, with leaders, and the general public really rode in behind that as well. But we're only some of the way there, and I feel like some of the players have left the pitch. And I really think that how we address the issues that long COVID presents will determine the true legacy for how we've handled this. We must mitigate against preventable loss of health, and we must provide services that address impacts in daily living, in work, in quality of life, and that is a moral as well as a health imperative. So occupational therapists are clinical experts at assessing how different health conditions impact on what you want to do. So we're all about doing, in particular, what are the occupations, what are the things that you do, want to do, need to do in your daily life. We are dual trained in physical and mental health, and we have that wide-reaching skill set which can go across many of the symptoms that present within long COVID, and indeed many of the impacts where they're felt across a person's life. So work, mood, daily living, their environment. Where we're at, I suppose, in terms of Ireland and occupational therapy at the moment in long COVID, is that there's no OT in the HSE post-acute clinics, which are respiratory-led and which cover the period of 4 to 12 weeks post-COVID. And then 4 out of 6 long COVID clinics have occupational therapy input, either in half or in full, and with a 5th currently piloting the service, and that's St. Vincent's. Now, all of those are adult long COVID services, and as we know, there are currently no specialist long COVID services for children. Other places that adult OT services are available are primary care, hospital settings, older person services, and private care providers as well. So certainly in terms of access to services, if there's issues there, we can discuss them for sure in the Q&A. But long COVID profoundly disrupts our occupations, and that's what we aim to restore. It impacts upon us, not just in the doing, the very visible doing where you can see what somebody's doing, but also that doing really impacts on our roles, on our belonging, and in terms of our becoming as well, our future selves. Where am I at in my career trajectory? Real reflective thought in terms of our children. If they can't access the doing, how do they become? And that all has profound impacts on belonging, on roles, on friendships, and on really being members of society, and really being included and being part of society, and being minded in the way that we should be minded, by a caring and inclusive society. So with belonging, it's not just the responsibility on the person to do the actions that make them belong, but also on society to really be inclusive and to reach out, and provide enablers, to allow people to belong. So one of the key tools that we would use, and I suppose I'm zoning in particularly around fatigue, but energy is not just impacted in fatigue. So fatigue, I suppose, is the experience, a very significant kind of, very definite kind of loss of energy. But energy deficits can also present in a host of other areas, including things like brain fog, including things like pain. So energy conservation can impact, certainly, I suppose it's designed and geared up to really have an impact on the experience of fatigue, but it also can have a ripple effect, outwards in reducing the symptom burden overall. So as I say, energy conservation is one of the tools that would be commonly used by occupational therapists in this area. And really what it's about is learning how to spend the energy that you have. So, long COVID disrupts, I suppose there's many theories as to how long COVID impacts on our energy production. But I suppose on a very basic level, your energy is made in your mitochondria, and you need fuel, you need oxygen, you need hydration, and you need a host of various factors to be there to create that. And you also need a non-toxic environment, so not for the cell to be focused on producing energy and not focusing on fighting and inflammation, for example. So within long COVID, whatever is happening, it is reducing the energy available to a person for their daily living. So energy conservation looks at learning how to spend your energy. It aims to enable people to get the most from their energy without triggering symptom exacerbation. I'll come on to that in a moment. And three concepts that are integral to occupational therapy are time use, tempo, and temporality. And I think this is where we use energy conservation different to other professions. Energy conservation is really, really challenging to do, but to do so can reduce the symptom burden. And while it might seem like you're taking things out of your day, it actually can give you back time in your day as you begin to get more proficient at it. And this is mainly because you're spending less time in that recovery zone. So it's not that you are pushing yourself on, and that if you do this, you will push yourself on and you'll have more energy and you get to do this and you get to do that. But really the main focus of it is budgeting really what you have. So that instead of spending it on things that are high cost energy-wise, you can actually spread it across your occupation, spread it across the 24 hours, so that you're not going into an energy deficit and that you're not triggering things like post-exertional malaise, for example. So first thing is to get to know your own levels, to work out your baseline. And that's easier said than done. So one idea is, for example, to use an energy diary. You can also use apps. You can also use kind of, various different tools like that, worksheets, various things like that. But where do you spend your energy? That's really the question you're trying to answer. And you're thinking about energy not just in terms of the physical tasks that you have, but also the cognitive or the thinking tasks that you're doing, the social tasks, the emotional tasks. And can you see predictable patterns of boom and bust? So over time, do you start to see, yeah, actually, showering is a real trigger for me. I am absolutely flaked after I've had a shower, for example. And I suppose over time, then what we're looking to do with the support of an OT or with the support of, the support group, for example, can you aim for more predictable patterns and routines? And by having, instead of this boom, bust, boom, bust, boom, bust, and having a little bit more of a predictable pattern, it can allow you to engage in more occupations, more activities as well. even though it might seem that you're pulling back from some things, actually you'll be more consistent over the bigger picture. And challenges with long COVID, of course, are particular challenges in long COVID, similar to ME/CFS, are overlapping symptoms. So where it's really hard to see, now was that pain because it's my baseline, or was that pain to do with the position I was in, or was it the activity I was doing? And then you've also got fatigue levels. You've also got, other issues, like maybe your cognition, your gut, all overlapping. And it's very hard to trace that overlapping picture back, which is why it's really helpful to have some professional support in doing that as well. So I'm going to get into the 4 Ps now and tell you about the time use, temporality and tempo piece, and they're particularly, I suppose, how we focus on problem solving with people who have difficulty in applying these, because it's easier to say than to do these things. It's actually really, really challenging to consistently do pacing, for example. So I'm going to tell you just some common problems that people come up against and maybe some suggested solutions, and we can definitely explore this further in the Q&A. But pacing essentially concerns an activity rest balance. So balancing what you're doing with what you're not doing, so that your body has time to recover in between. So for example, one example is time-based pacing. So for example, you might rest for X amount of times, however much time, as long as the activity took you. So if you spent 10 minutes peeling potatoes, you would spend 30 minutes resting, for example. Now, the exact amount of time and things like that would be proportionate to your symptoms. Okay, so if you're very, very symptomatic, we'll come on to planning in a moment, you might say, well, I'm not going to do that at all. I'm going to do a rice that I can just, put in the pan instead. So you might switch and change. But if you're doing that, you might over time, as your symptoms begin to settle, as you begin to kind of get to that more level, terrain rather than this bumpy, mountainous territory, you might find actually I'm okay after 25 minutes. I'm okay after 20 minutes. So gradually, if you can get into that healing zone, and you may find that over time, you may be able to reduce that down. But it's not it's not a rehab program where you gradually reduce that down. The thing is, as your symptoms settle, you may find, and that might be that you notice that over a period of 4 to 6 weeks. It's not a case of, oh, I've done it that way yesterday, let me try and push myself today. The temptation is there, but that's not helpful in a condition like long COVID. Other areas would be to take breaks or micro breaks within tasks. So can I chunk up that task? If I'm making a stew, for example, and I'm cutting carrots, I need to cut meat, I need to chop onions. Can I do portions of it in the morning? Can I do portions of it again at lunchtime? And then can I actually cook the meal in the evening? So you can chunk it, or you can just take short micro breaks during the task. And again, a lot of that will depend on how much you need to rest and whether you need to, for example, change position when you're resting. So common problems with pacing would be tempo. So who's controlling the tempo? And this is particularly an issue with regards to externally within the workplace, for example. Can you take back some control, some tempo with regards to your daily living? Now, symptoms guide the activity, so there's no progressive increments. And I suppose of concern is that pacing is now being used in ways that doesn't represent energy conservation. It's kind of I suppose people have jumped on a basic pacing as the solution and are now dressing up wolves in sheep's clothing. And I certainly would caution against people seeing it as being used as graded exercise in disguise. So if you get a recipe book of saying do this and then 3 days later do that and then 3 days later do the other, that's not what pacing is about. Other times is that the chunk is too big, so you can hit into post-exertional malaise. So sometimes people say, well, I do all my tasks in the morning and then I rest in the afternoon. Is that 3 to 1, But actually what they've done is so much in the morning that they've kicked into post-exertional malaise by 11 o'clock, or activities that would trigger it later in the day or later again the following day, perhaps. So again, you're into that movement bust. So start really small, much smaller than you think you do, and start to work in those rest breaks. And time-based pacing is one concrete, simple example to start with, but certainly it's not the only one, and there's loads of good resources out there around pacing. And also it sometimes feels because it's the wrong strategy. So sometimes, for example, things like cognition, pacing is helpful, as in breaking things down, but it's not always the best strategy. So another strategy like simplification might be better, or another strategy like coming off your feet and letting your blood flow to your head. So positioning might be better. So I'll come on to those in a few moments. Prioritizing is simple. I suppose it's kind of what matters to you, and making choices about where to spend your energy that you have in a way that you see is right. When you do those activity logs, what you might find is you may be surprised where it's going. So sometimes people who would like to prioritize, say, for example, spending more time with their family, but are actually spending way too much energy on showering in the way that they used to shower, because that's what feels normal and right, and there's a need in that as well. So oftentimes the problem solving around this is actually not so much about the tasks, because people often know what they want to spend their energy on, but it is just that really difficult human piece around change and adjustment and grief, and needing support around, you know, taking that all apart and really thinking about it and thinking, gosh, you know, maybe things are different and maybe I do need to make some changes. And then the other piece is that your priorities may not be what other people see as priorities, you know, and so there can be a little bit of interpersonal conflict sometimes, you know, be that in a workplace setting with line management, be that in a home setting where, you know, the kids see a priority that you know, you see maybe a tidy home or a hot meal as a priority, and they see the jigsaw. So that can be, you know, a challenge to get there as well. People often know what the tasks are, I suppose is what I'm saying, but actually on an emotional level, hard to deliver. And then of course there's external factors beyond our control. Financially, you know, you may have to do things, financial, family, etc. I'm going to hurry up, you'll be glad to hear. Temporal factors then relate to planning, identifying a course of action for a given situation, and introducing things like modification where that's needed. I would really encourage people, particularly if they experience brain fog or cognitive difficulties, to externalize the plan, write it down, get it out of your head and onto a page or onto a phone or onto a you know, a sticky on the back of the door. Because at least if you do need to take a break, then you can come back to it. And it also reduces the cognitive load for the task as well. So you can kind of, you don't have to store up all the 10 steps, you actually have them down in front of you. Think, where can I introduce a hack? Where can I simplify this? And this is why it's a great strategy for brain fog in particular. So can I introduce something that's going to reduce the cognitive load? So instead of the same really complex task, how can I distill this down into the essence of it and really reduce that down? So it's a great strategy for brain fog. And with that, I suppose it becomes a really good strategy for people who are at college, people who are working, you know, things like, you know, more complex domestic tasks, cooking, you know, organizing the shopping list, you know, externalize. And then with regards to planning, I think everybody who experiences post-exertion malaise or significant pain should really have an emergency plan for those bad days, you know, so almost having it said in advance, because when you're in the midst of a crash, it's really hard to direct, even if they're very helpful helpers, really hard to direct helpers. And can you get me my pain relief now? And it's on the third shelf, and this, no, it's the blue one. Sorry, and I need to take it with water. Can you? And it's all of this is draining you. So really having kind of like almost like an emergency plan for those days when, you know, you are crashing, when you're going to need support. And equally, you know, somebody I was working with recently, we came up with like a little emoji. So she would send this emoji to her mum, and it meant kind of code red, get over here, I need your help. And I don't want to be texting 3 paragraphs explaining all of my symptoms, you know. So that can just be a really good thing to do as well. And a lot of there's some really good guides, particularly the ME Society, I think, have a really good one as well. Problem solving, Planning in itself takes energy. Not everything is foreseeable. And also there can be the snowball effect where one thing goes wrong and the next thing goes wrong and the next thing goes wrong and the best plan goes awry. But equally, we can have optimism bias. So sometimes we can think things will go really well, and it's no harm to have a plan B for the days that don't go so well. So that may take the form of equipment, it may take the form of having a backup person, or it may take the form of just having that conversation in advance to say, hey, if I need to leave that presentation early, can you cover for me? Or if I need to leave that presentation, can I go first so that, my piece is done? So all of those kind of things would fall within that. And then positioning, the whole talk in itself on positioning and the relative demands, particularly for people who have co-occurring POTS, which is positional orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, which means that basically when you change position, your heart rate goes bananas, so that it can increase greatly disproportionate to the actual task that it's doing. So for example, the heart rate might, just from coming up from lying into sitting, the heart rate might really shoot up. So that increases the energy demands, and also, may for some people, who are particularly using biofeedback, maybe an indicator that they're about to go into an activity that suggests that they're going into more anaerobic energy production within the body, which is where, instead of using oxygen to make the body's fuel, the body tries to do it. Those mitochondria and the cells try to do it without oxygen. They can do that, but it's very inefficient. It's like driving on a motorway in third gear. So it's really, really inefficient, and it causes a whole lot of side effects, I suppose, really within the body as well. So particularly for people with POTS, this is a key energy conservation approach. And also people think of it as being because it's a physical act that you do. Is it just for physical tasks? But no, it's brilliant for cognitive tasks as well. So if you can kind of change the position, get into a lying position, semi-reclined position, even for a rest break, even for a few moments, can really impact on that. So problem solving, again, change. I can do it this way, so should I want to do it this way? I've always done it that way. May need equipment, space, layout changes, and external factors. So does it look wrong to other people? Does it look like you're lying down on the job, literally? It doesn't matter if you get the job done. If you're semi-reclined, you're on your couch or whatever. But actually, people, what's right and how it looks to some people, particularly external to the person with long COVID, that may be an issue. So I've just put one slide here around activity modification, for example, for showering. So you can see there's a multitude of ways. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tasks that people do, probably thousands, I don't know, millions. And we're all diverse in our combinations of things. So, the activity modification will be depending on what elements of this are right for you or your child, for example. What is your particular symptom profile? What are your triggers? But for example, you can see with regards to showering, there can be various different things that's thrown in: planning ones, positioning ones, pacing ones, as well, and they can all be applied within the task. So rest and sleep, I could do a whole hour on this alone, and although you can feel very tired, it can be really, really hard to sleep. And paradoxically, when you need it most, sleep can be hardest to come by, because sleep is the sleep disturbance is part of the disease process. So, and fatigue is absolutely not a lack of sleep. But when the two combine, it makes things incredibly difficult. So if we can get rest and sleep a little bit better, that can sometimes help, so you don't get this snowball effect of the two coming in together. And so supporting sleep and rest is a really key role for OTs. I mean, in a non-pharmacological way. So we're not prescribers, but really looking at the things that go around sleep, your habits, your positioning again, and looking at that. Resting isn't just about sleeping; it's about really disengaging, and sometimes, depending on the resting and depending on how symptomatic you are, a low energy activity can also be a really helpful rest activity. So for example, there might be like really low energy gaming, you know, listening to audiobooks, that sort of thing. So sometimes if you don't have enough energy to do a high energy task, but you finished resting, for example, you do need to rest after tasks. But if you finish that rest and you're bored and you want to do something else, you can absolutely look at ways to reduce the energy demands of tasks, and also look at low energy activities like even watching TV, watching old, for me it'd be musicals or things like that, you know, that you know, it doesn't take much brain power to watch these things, you know. But everybody's different. That would be hell on earth to my husband, just one example. So not all naps are created equal, but I want to say napping is good. Naps get a very bad rap, and unjustifiably so, particularly in long COVID and in lots of chronic diseases, to be honest. But you need to understand how to nap. And I suppose it's looking at taking effective naps that support your body clock and maintain your energy levels. So some different types of naps that I've just thrown in here would be a recovery nap. So where you are tired enough to sleep and you have a recovery nap as your rest period after activity. Prophylactic napping, so very fancy way to say, do it ahead of time. So you're preparing for an activity. So say, for example, you've got a really busy day tomorrow and you try to put in additional levels of rest the day before to prepare for the activity. Appetited naps are just for fun. These are the ones that you do and you're imagining you're on the hammock on the beach. You know, it's just so nice to close your eyes and drop off for 20 minutes. And there's nothing wrong with that. The challenge is sometimes that can happen much too late in the day. So these are the ones we kind of need to watch, you know, but they are nice and definitely, you know, great part of your day. Fulfillment nap is then to make up sleep needs. So for example, if you have had a really disruptive night and you know you've only got about 5 hours sleep, you should probably think about considering factoring in fulfillment naps. And then finally, essential naps are essential naps which support our immune systems and our recovery. So particularly useful in terms of illness and recovery. And then finally, cognitive difficulties are really common, and the pattern follows more of a physiological pattern than a focal organic deficit. And it reflects what can be a very unpredictable symptom. So I suppose what I mean by that physiological pattern are things like neuroinflammation, and decreased cerebral blood flow, rather than the type of focal organic deficit that you might see, for example, with a stroke or with a traumatic brain bleed, for example. So very often the MRI, the brain can be normal because there isn't this architectural issue within the brain that's malfunctioned or that's been damaged. But nonetheless, these physiological changes can be co-occurring and they're not always detectable within routine brain scans, for example. And this reflects what can be an unpredictable symptom, which is often best managed with external strategies and energy conservation rather than traditional cognitive rehabilitation tasks. Now, if there is a focal issue, then absolutely you might decide to do a very modified cognitive rehab approach with somebody, but you need to be really careful within that you don't trigger post-exertional malaise. And also, I suppose, a positive note that can be a very early indicator of exertion sometimes in a given task. Sometimes people can notice that, oh, I'm starting to lose my concentration. Oh, I'm feeling a bit lightheaded. That can sometimes be a very early indicator of that you've gone too far, that you're heading into an exertion zone. So just to be really aware of that. I've concluded my talk, and I'm sorry, I know I've gone over time. I think the glitches at the start gave me the heebie-jeebies and I started talking.
No, that's fine. Ciara, thank you so much.
Thank you all for listening.
Thanks so much, Ciara. That was fantastic. Great information there. I'm going to just remind everyone to submit questions as we go along if they can. And then I'm going to pop straight to Kirsty, who is independent OT at Occupation for Life and our team OT at Long Covid Kids Charity. Thanks, Kirsty.
Hi there, everybody. Let me just share. Can you all see that okay?
Yeah, we can indeed. Thanks so much.
Fabulous. Okay, so obviously Ciara and I have one brain, because there is some overlap between our presentations. But that is absolutely fine, because I will find sort of a different and tact take on things. But that was an excellent presentation. Thank you, Ciara. So obviously, in terms of children, I want you to kind of understand how long COVID can present perhaps slightly differently in children and young people, although a lot of the symptom profiles are the same between adults and children. And then also just appreciate the potential role of occupational therapy in supporting management of the condition, alongside what I think is really important, particularly for children, is supporting engagement in a meaningful and fulfilled life. And just at the end, I'll just sort of make you aware of the resources available via the Long COVID Kids charity, so that you've got those as well. So as Ciara said, long COVID is an umbrella term created by patients. You will probably hear to the NHS refer to it more as post-COVID syndrome or post-COVID condition. And in America, they call it something that I can't even pronounce. So is it post-acute sequelae of COVID or something like that, which is really tricky. So I'm glad I don't work in America. So the symptoms of long COVID in children and young people, as Ciara said, extreme exhaustion, otherwise known as fatigue. But we wanted to kind of highlight that it isn't just feeling a bit tired, it is around this extreme lack of energy. Dizziness, rashes seem to be a lot more common in children than in adults. We see lots of weird rashes all over the body, COVID toes, those sorts of things. Obviously cognitive issues, headaches, lots of sickness and nausea, stomach pains and upsets, general pain, the post-exertional symptom exacerbation. There can be mood changes, and I will talk around that a little bit more afterwards. And then something that we do seem to see more in children than adults is sort of things like tics and neuropsychiatric symptoms such as behavioural regression or regression in terms of their development, eating disorders, obsessive compulsive disorder, those sorts of things. And I'll describe what that could be linked to afterwards. And then obviously muscles and joint pain, breathlessness, and the change in sense of smell and taste. But we actually see that probably less so now, I think. But for some children, it's really, really apparent, and sort of years late, 3 years later, they're still getting a really unusual taste when they're eating food, which can obviously affect their ability to intake food and drink. So symptoms vary by individual. They can. So what it's important to be aware of, so if you're in this session and you're kind of wondering, does my child have long COVID, is a lot of children have asymptomatic initial infection, or they have a mild cold. Sorry, my puppy is coming to say hello. So what can happen is that children can seemingly recover from the initial acute infection, but then start to develop this constellation of weird symptoms weeks or even months afterwards. Or obviously some people can be quite unwell to start with and just not recover, just continue to be unwell. And we do know that long COVID is sort of episodic, it's relapsing, remitting, and that possibly very much links in with sort of the post-exertional symptom exacerbation, but there's also some other aspects that may contribute that I'll go through. Apologies for my dogs fighting in the background now. So Ciara has the technical issues and I have the the dog children. So the duration of symptoms is unclear, and we obviously know that a number of children and young people have still been ill since the very beginning of the pandemic. So we're looking at 3 years plus for that, but obviously others do recover. Quite often a sort of a year in tends to be a common recovery point, and then sort of 18 months to 2 years, but the majority, I think it was 58% of children that we surveyed recently were sort of still either unwell or having relapses within that recovery. So this is how children and young people describe their long COVID. So in this elephant, tiring, painful, aches, hurt, dizzy, hate it, poo is my favourite description there. And we obviously want children to be listened to and believed. That's really important. Give them understanding, to consult with them on what they want and what's important to them. And obviously to support them to be able to access education, engage with learning, engage with their friends, be a kid, and obviously improve their mental health and emotional well-being. So I think Ciara touched on this a little bit, but we do see some common sort of syndromes that we know about that have existed pre-long COVID that we typically kind of see within the pediatric population. So obviously the MECFS, which the sort of the fatigue, cognitive dysfunction, brain fog, and post-exertional symptom exacerbation are sort of clusters of symptoms that may indicate that MECFS is a sort of co-occurring condition. I know there are some pediatric specialists that are calling it long COVID ME, for example, when it has sort of been longer than sort of 6 months or so that this has been occurring. POTS, Ciara mentioned, but also other dysautonomias. So a lot of kids may not meet the criteria for POTS. So when we do the sort of the NASA lean test, which is an active stand test where we kind of measure their heart rate, they don't meet the criteria for either 30 or 40 beat jump per minute, but they're getting a lot of the same sort of symptoms. So they may be sort of slightly subclinical. Or it could be that there's other dysautonomias going on. So that's important to kind of look at and rule out. Mast cell activation syndrome, which this is the sort of the cluster where there's a lot of allergies and rashes, headaches, hoarse voice, those sorts of things. And then the neuropsychiatric symptoms could be linked to PANDAS, which is pediatric acute neuropsychiatric syndrome. A lot of these syndromes are controversial in themselves. They shouldn't be, but there is still debate within the medical community about whether they exist, whether we should treat them. America is a further ahead on us in terms of treating PANS in particular. But there is, lots and lots of evidence to suggest that these things are real and need addressing. And there are, thankfully, ways and means of kind of addressing those if you can access the right support. So I've put the controversy of anxiety and depression because we know that a lot of children and adults have been quite gaslit by certain services in terms of saying, well, it's because you're anxious that you're having these symptoms. And that's not the case. But what I will say is that anxiety and depression could be a secondary factor of a condition. It could also be a primary factor. So if you've got brain inflammation, you could have anxiety and depression caused by the COVID infection as well. So it is still really, really important to address anxiety and depression symptoms. And my fear is that the way it's been handled in some areas means that people then don't talk about those symptoms. And that's really risky because actually it's really important that we're able to address those symptoms as well. And obviously, as Ciara said, occupational therapists are dual trained. We look at physical and mental health, so can look at both of those together and look at the overlap between them and how they interact. I mentioned sort of the other things causing post-exertional symptom exacerbation, so the impact of hormones. So all of us of a certain gender or have certain hormones flowing through our body may find that actually at the time of menstruation or just before menstruation, all of our long COVID symptoms start to flare up. And there's lots of research being done into this. So, for example, I have definitely seen this, and I have had benefit from going on a hormonal sort of replacement, basically. But that can happen in young girls and teens and stuff as well. So it may even bring on COVID may bring on early menstruation or stop menstruation that has happened. So if there are those things going on, then do raise that. There's a lot of discussion around neurodiversity within the long COVID population. So sort of having ADHD, autism, dyspraxia, dyslexia, etc. But often what is co-occurring with those neurodiverse conditions is hypermobility and connective tissue disorders. And I personally think that it's probably that is the contributing factor rather than the neurodiversity itself. Stop fighting. So post-exertional symptom exacerbation, I've got just a 1-minute video if it plays from long COVID kids, because I think this is a key symptom that we need to be aware of, particularly, well, in adults and children really, but in terms of looking at how we move forward with treatments. Can you hear that?
Post-exertional symptom exacerbation, also known as post-exertional malaise, is the term used to describe the worsening of different symptoms following activities like thinking, moving, socializing, or an activity that could previously be tolerated. Symptoms typically worsen 12 to 48 hours after activity and can be followed by an unusually slow return to baseline, lasting for days, weeks, or even months, and sometimes leading to a relapse. Post-exertional symptom exacerbation is all-encompassing, with symptoms affecting every part of the body, difficult to predict or manage, and often requiring complete bed rest to fully or partially recover from the activity. Many people may not recognise post-exertional symptom exacerbation due to its often delayed and unpredictable presentation and how invisible the symptom can be to others.
Okay, so I've just popped here a questionnaire that is quite commonly used to sort of screen for post-exertional symptom exacerbation. So that can be really useful to kind of go through just to see if that's a symptom you or your child is experiencing. And obviously, like Ciara said, what we don't want to do with anybody that's experiencing post-exertional symptom exacerbation is look at graded exercise therapy. We need to do the pacing and making any changes or increases in activity based on your symptom alleviation. So it's basically a very led by you or the child thing. So obviously occupational therapy, I had to speak to Ciara about this in terms of Ireland because I'm based in England. There is no specialist long COVID services for under 16s, and occupational therapy access will be very variable dependent on local pathways. But you could access through your GP, so the community settings, disability network teams. There may be some benefit to being seen in CAMS in some areas, social services or local councils for housing adaptations where needed, and obviously private practitioners for those that can afford that. So energy management, Ciara went through this really well, so I'm not going to kind of go through it again, but just to highlight the cautious tortoise and pacing penguins resources that we have on our website that hopefully address this in a more child-friendly way, probably more for younger children, but you know, adults can help with looking at younger resources as well. And I just want to reiterate the kind of the idea of biofeedback and heart rate monitoring. A number of children that I've spoken to recently are really finding benefit from sort of using Fitbits and Garmins and really getting that visual cue of how much energy they're using, you know, what their body battery is doing, if they're in fat burn. So even today I spoke to somebody who said prior to trying compression stockings for POTS, they were going into fat burn mode even when they weren't doing anything, you know, possibly just standing up. And actually the compression stockings has stopped that. So, you know, I want to reiterate that actually energy sort of boom and bust isn't necessarily because of something that you're doing, but it could be because of an internal process that's going on as well. Occupational balance, this is just about having a really good balance between the self-care, productivity, leisure, what you need to do, but you will need to kind of gauge this and it will change over time. So early in the condition, you may need a lot more rest and a lot more self-care. And then later in the condition, you may push towards kind of actually, you know, my education is really important now, so that's where I'm going to spend my energy, and maybe I'll have a bit more help with self-care, for example. And, you know, a core belief of us is engaging in occupations or activities that are meaningful to us is really important. But what I get out of an activity and what you get out of it, the same activity, may be very, very different. So that's one of the things OTs can do, is actually explore either ways to make that activity easier, looking at equipment that might help, or thinking about what other activities could give you that same sense of meaning. And that is super important for kids, especially in terms of connecting. And then some of the other bits and pieces that we can do: pain management, cognitive, sensory, and mental health support. And then I will just flick through these slides because I know they want to get onto the Q&A. And this is just some links to the resources from Long Covid Kids. So we have support services, we have the Facebook group for parents, we have Long Covid Kids Connected Zoom sessions, we have a choir, we're going to start a book group and a creative writing group. So there's lots of things going on that kids and teens can connect with each other. And I will stop sharing.
Thanks so much, Kirsty. That was excellent. Thank you. Yeah, I just want to flag again, I guess, longcovidkids.org. It's amazing. We have some fantastic resources that hopefully will be helpful to, I know we've had some questions from some parents. So I'm just going to allow Tanya to pick this up, and I know we're out of time, but we'll take a few more minutes if that's okay with people, and just go run through a few questions. Tanya, do you want to take over?
Sure, thanks. Thanks a million to all the speakers. It was absolutely amazing. Can I say that a lot of people have been giving great feedback to both your presentations and have been asking for the slides because they can't always take it in cognitively, me included. So just to let everybody know, we have recorded, we will be sharing the recording, and we will also share the slides. So don't worry, let your brains rest. You'll have time to look at the stuff at your own pace in the coming days and weeks. So there's a lot of questions, we can't get through them all, and I'm really sorry that we can't, but what we will do is we'll take the details of the questions, and over our social media channels we're going to post out answers to those questions over the coming days and weeks, because that'll help everybody and a lot more people, I guess. There was a very OT related question in terms of tips on how to plan for travel activities and medical appointments, because in Ireland at least we're not getting a joined up service where you might have 3 or 4 appointments all in one day, so that you only have to build up the energy and the travel time and all the rest of it for one appointment. So we're getting a lot of different appointments on a lot of different days. Is there any strategies, Ciara or Kirsty, that could help us with managing our energy levels for that?
I'm just laughing because so my ninny or gran lives in Wales and had to go to keep going to Liverpool for some for some testing, and in the end we actually contacted PALS to say she's got these 2 things. Is there any way we can actually line up her 2 appointments so they're on the same day to reduce that need? In terms of children, I know a lot of families, particularly when there is a lot of travel involved, have sort of gone down, stayed somewhere the day before, had the appointment, stayed there, and then travelled back the day afterwards. It's really difficult, isn't it? Because you don't know, you don't want to lose an appointment by asking to rearrange it. But, you know, we do rearrange appointments, don't we? Within health services. So if you really can't do it and you've got 12 appointments on that one week, then do contact a couple of them to see if they can move things around a bit.
And I would just add that I agree completely with Kirsty, you know, but I would add as well to ask, in some cases, you know, a virtual appointment can work as well. You know, like a lot of occupational therapy, for example, is, is talking, it's kind of talking about your energy impairment. It's talking about the various different issues that you're having, is maybe doing some assessment or goal setting. So certainly some of that, could also be done online as well. So I think asking, and seeing, and I think by and large, that maybe can't be accommodated on the same day. They might do a virtual clinic and they might do a face-to-face clinic, but you might be able to be accommodated via that means as well. So it's another option. Doesn't work for everything.
Thanks, Ciara. Thanks, Kirsty. Another question came, actually, there was a few kind of in the same territory related to work and maybe workplace situations where employers did not understand anything about long COVID and the impact it has on someone. And are there any accommodations that could be asked for? Are there any rights for someone who has a chronic illness in a working situation? Maybe Ciara, the Irish situation fairly well.
Yeah, I mean, this is an Irish situation and it's a universal situation, as I'm sure Kirsty will agree as well. So with regards to what on a mandatory level, needs to be there, I suppose issues would be accommodations under the disability legislation, so where somebody is meeting the criteria for a longer term disability. But really, in most cases, I suppose it's trying to convince the employer that actually, we're in a labour crisis at the moment. And I suppose trying to convince the employer that actually, sometimes it can take a lot of time to go through the formal routes. And that actually a more informal, meeting in advance, maybe if there's occupational health, maybe if there's even a union member, or a supportive friend, within the workplace who knows the role, could be really helpful. I think for a meeting with an employer, things like that, preparation in advance. Maybe emailing them some of the short to read fact sheets. They're not going to watch an hour-long webinar probably, but there are some fact sheets that could be really useful for the person and also for the other employees. I'm thinking about an employer-employee situation here now, but it's often your colleagues that can make or break a situation as well. And I think having them understand that you need these accommodations, due to the challenges that you're having with your condition, and not because they're not working hard too. So I think sometimes that culture piece isn't in any legislation, but it sometimes is the make or break thing for a work site. And then the final thing I'd say, and I'll let Kirsty on, is to say that a staggered return to work, no more than with graded exercise program, where week 1 we do 10 hours, week 2 we do 15, and week 3, it doesn't always go like the steps of the stairs. And so those kind of very prescriptive incremental return to work programs are often not successful. So it's often about adding in maybe the initial 10 hours and really knitting that in to the energy spend for the week and probably for the month, really. I think almost a 4 to 6 week period before you increase is a lot more realistic for some people, particularly people who've been symptomatic for a longer period of time.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we're very over time now, like 10 minutes over for people who are suffering from long COVID. We might not be able to take a whole lot more questions. Just to say, from Long Covid Advocacy Ireland, there was an awful lot of questions around access to clinics, around the involvement of OTs, whether they're going to have OTs. There's a lot of people really wanting OTs, as do we, as part of that multidisciplinary team. Long Covid Ireland, we founded it because of the issues. If there were no issues, we probably wouldn't exist. That's the reality of the situation. And so we're involved in quite a lot of advocacy work, just to let everyone on here know, around getting involved and trying to get that equity of access, trying to also inform diagnostic and treatment criteria. And you'll be hearing more from us and our kind of role in that over the coming weeks. There are tons of other questions, folks, and I'm really sorry that we can't get to more, but like I said, we're actually going to do a whole series of question and answers on social media so that the wider long COVID community can get access to this information. And if it's okay, Ciara and Kirsty, we'll link in with you for some of the specifics on the answers to those questions to make sure that OT is informed in the answers. Is that all right?
we'd be delighted to. Yeah,
I
of course.
did
Brilliant,
answer
thanks.
some questions in the chat. Right,
Oh, that's great, Kirsty. Thanks so
Great.
much.
Thanks a million.
And just to reiterate, sorry, based on what Ciara's saying, is that kids have the same problems with education. So again, that's one of the key roles that I kind of play with when I'm working with kids is negotiations and discussions with education establishments about sort of what a phased return looks like, what a hybrid support looks like, etc.
Yeah, we could do a whole webinar actually on this, and this is the first, can I say, of probably a whole series of webinars. So stick around and keep an eye on our channels, because we'll let you know when the next one's coming up.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Tanya, I think it's important, just if you find your answer isn't available, from social media over the next few weeks, you can always contact us. You'll find our email address on our website. And thank you so much to Kirsty and Ciara.
You're so welcome. Thanks again for having us.
Thanks so much.
And for the engagement, Stephen. Thank you so much.
Stay well, everybody.
Stay well, and thanks for the attendance. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.